Hello again, Struck. Diablo Force Open beta tests are almost here, and I'm already making pre-launch theory-crafted semi-builds that would be good for fresh into endgame characters when the game is fully launched. I also plan to evolve them in fully fledged setups when the game is released and keep them updated when we get rebalance updates, seasons, and in general just patches. This is one such build for the Druid Class called Rocky. Rocky, not to be mistaken with Rocky Balboa or anything like that, just because we're using a lot of earth damage, earth skills, rocks, such as throwing a big giant boulder at our enemies. And you probably see what I did there. Um, the beta tests will only let us reach 25 in terms of levels and only play the first act / zone fractured peaks. And this is limiting us with in various ways, such as not having the specialization capstone skill, but only having the ultimate up until the ultimate, as well as only having access to dungeons in the first act, which means only having access to dungeon obtained codex aspect powers from that first act. Although hopefully in the first act you can still get legendary powers that normally require obtaining from other act dungeons. But the biggest thing is that those setups I'm making are useful for around level 60 characters. This specific one is actually 66 points. You will see where they went in a moment. Um, but I think they're supposed to make you jumpstart your post story endgame grind, make you endgame ready. You have those level 60-ish builds, and on the way to 100 from 60 something, you can fill in with some of the skills I have prepared for you. Speaking of skills I've prepared for you, I have spreadsheets. See the links in the description for those builds and additional ones like the mini skill calculator thingy. And those versions, you would actually see them in this video as well. They provide you with the skills, active passive skills that I think work well with the build, even if I haven't invested into the passive skills, not all of them at least. I have given you some options on the way to 100 to put the remaining skill points as you progress. And as well as I've put 20 something legendary aspects. So even though you need like 10 or 9, depending whether you go one-handed or two-handed, aspects, I have given you alternative choices if you're not finding what you need, to have some fillers, temporary replacements, or things to experiment with if you don't like some of the best in SWAT things I've put. So hopefully you enjoy this. Buckle up and let's go. We are starting with the Rocky Builds skills. 66 points as you can see here. We're taking Earth Spike, Landslide, Earthen Bulwark, Wolves, mind you. If you don't need a companion, you can remove that and either add another skill or just keep using 5 instead of 6 skills. Then we have Boulder, our big giant rock. We have Petrify. I think from all the ultimate skills, this is the only one that synergizes well with this setup, giving us some stun and not a weak stun, mind you, 3 second stun. Sure, it's a long cooldown and it does grant spirit and stuff. And we have Earthen Might. So maxed out Earth Spike, enhanced Earth Spike for chance to stun. This actually requires a bludgeoning weapon, and I have some comments regarding that. Bludgeoning weapon, the game so far is not clear whether there will be one-handed bludgeoning weapons. Some people on the internet are classifying one-handed maces and any other types of one-handed weapons as slashing. But a mace would make sense to be bludgeoning, so hopefully you are able to use a one-handed mace and the game would consider that bludgeoning. Because if one-handed maces are not considered bludgeoning and this requires a two-handed bludgeoning, then it's kind of limiting, but it's not the end of the world. I've prepared for that. You'll see later on when we talk about aspects. I prefer Fierce Earth Spike. So this build relies a lot on Fortify. It's stacking a lot of Fortify to make it little tanky, and so having a two-handed bludgeoning weapon, not a problem for us, being close and personal. We will be doing a lot of stunning, immobilizing, and knocking back with this build, so this synergizes well. But if you need extra speed generation, there's this one to consider, but I prefer this. Lens wide, more chances to deal crushing blow, cost spirit, and enemies hit by all three landslide pillars have chance to be immobilized. Again, synergy here. And this one, 10% increased crit strike chance and deals 30% multiplicative increased crit strike damage against enemies who are stunned, immobilized, knocked back. And we will be doing that a lot, as you know. You'll see soon why. This one is not bad, but I'd rather take that one. Heart of the Wild. So a little bit of extra spirit. I'm not sure if that's 3 points per 3 points of spirit per point invested level of the skill, or whether it's one. It remains to be seen. I hope this is 3 per point, so you get 9 spirit when maxed out. Here there are upgrades. I did invest into this because I think it's okay to get extra spirit generation. Hopefully this is 5% per point for 15%. This one is not bad. And if it's 10% multiplicative per point, getting 30% multiplicative extra damage for 15% cost and having this 15% more generation might negate it. Earthen Bulwark, you become unstoppable and you absorb damage, and this actually the game apparently considers this as a barrier. So things that trigger from barriers apparently would be triggering from this skill. Enhanced Bulwark makes you unstoppable while active, so I'm assuming this makes you unstoppable is actually coming from here. And if you don't have that, this won't be there. Now, casting Bulwark grants Fortify. This is what we need. We are stacking Fortify. You'll see later on why we are stacking so much Fortify. It's not just for survivability. It's actually boosting our damage having Fortify. This one is actually super solid as well for extra damage, but you see why we are going the Fortify route very soon. Increase your non-physical resistances. This is lovely. You take X reduced damage for X seconds after using a defensive skill, which is also lovely, and we want to be close and personal. If you don't need that, you can save those 3 points. And now you're at 63. So it's up to you whether you want that one. Now, companions. Again, if you don't need them, you can save a whopping 7 points by not using companions. But I have used the companions, and I have used something that increases bonuses for each active companion. And wolves, we have 2 of them. And the wolves can focus a target. And when they focus a target, we deal increased multiplicative damage to the wolf's focus target. They also do increased damage to immobilized, stunned, swallowed, or poisoned, and we will be doing immobilized, stunned, or swallowed, or knocked down a lot. We won't be doing much poison, if any. All of the Wild is not bad if you have some spare points. Dealing increased crit damage to the wolf's focus target, extra 3 points here would be good to put them. I definitely would want to put them before reaching level 100 sometime there. Nature's Reach, multiplicative increase damage to distant enemies, especially if this is 8% per point and not 8% with 2 or 3 points. Nature's Reach, pretty solid, dealing damage to distant enemies and double if they're sword, stunned, immobilized, knocked back. Hopefully this is 3% per point for 9%, but not that urgent right away because it's only to distant enemies. Boulder, this knocks back. This is a massive rock, knocks back, deals damage, 10-second cooldown only, slowing the enemies, and now also granting 75% bonus spirit while damaging enemies who are knocked back by the boulder when using our Earth Spike. Solid choice. If you don't like that, then okay. The first enemy damaged by boulder is made vulnerable. Make sure you hit the biggest the biggest toughest enemy to make them vulnerable rather than a small fry enemy with it. Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal increased damage to sword, stunned, immobilized, knocked back. This synergy again. And we are using only Earth skills with the exception of Petrify for this build. Stone Guard. While fortified, over 50% of your maximum life. your earth skills do multiplicative increased damage. And this is where fortify bonuses, damage bonuses that come out of having a lot of fortify come handy. This is another thing, critical strikes with earth skills fortify you. So you can get this later on. Of course, it's gonna increase the cost. But it's a thing to consider. It's definitely a thing for us to consider in the setup. I definitely would take this eventually on the way to 100. Petrify maxed out those 3 upgrades, 2 upgrades, 3 points total. Killing petrified enemy granting spirit, perfect. So you stun them, you deal extra increased crit strike damage to petrified enemies. And hopefully in those 3 seconds, actually it's gonna be 4 seconds with this one, you are able to kill enough with your burst damage so you can get back for each petrified enemy 25 spirit. I think that's how this works. I think it doesn't just trigger once per petrify cast, but for every petrified enemy killed, you get 25 spirit. Defiance, damage reduction. No, not damage reduction. Extra damage against elites. And keep in mind, nature magic is earth damage skills, earth skills, and storm skills. So earth and storm skills both count as nature. That's what nature is, earth and storm. I didn't take this or that, or even this one. But this one is good. If you need that extra HP, use it. This one is not so bad. Increase damage to vulnerable enemies. So again, points to put on the way to 100 here, here, and here. That's extra 9 points you can put on the way to 100 here. And you would have plenty since from 66 to 200 you do have 34 points. So putting some points here won't break the piggy bank. This one is more suitable for builds that use earth and storm skills together, but I will make one such build later on. But still good to have it even without the storm skills bonus. It works even with just earth skills. But this one, triple this bonus, if you're doing that, then definitely you might want to consider swapping Petrify with a storm skill here if you want to use the most out of it. Defensive posture. Increase the damage reduction gained while we are fortified. Definitely nice. Tick height. Whenever you're stunned, immobilized, or knocked down, fortify. We want as much fortify as we can. This one is also nice. Chance when struck to fortify, so you definitely want to put those points eventually on the way to 100. And unrestrained, reduce the duration of control impairing effects by... So this one is not so bad. But I wouldn't prioritize it. I wouldn't prioritize it as much unless you're constantly getting crowd controlled. And Earthen Might. Damaging enemies with Earth skills has up to X% chance to grant Earthen Might. Well, not X actually, exactly 5% because it's only one level. This chance is increased to 10% for critical strikes. And further increased by another 10% to a total of 25 if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So you can get Earthen Might if you're critical striking, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back enemies by 25%. And what the certain might do, restore all of your spirit and grant you 100% critical strike chance for 5 seconds. So ideally you want to get as much crit strike on this build as possible. And if you're doing that with third skills to stunt, immobilize, or knock back enemies, you would be taking advantage of this. Let's move on to the next segment. Legendary aspects, legendary powers. What are they? How do they work? I'm gonna quickly describe them. Hopefully it's quick. So first of all, you can get legendary items as you kill enemies, as you wood chests and so on. And on those legendary items, there will be a legendary power, or such thing is referred to as aspect in the game. And this aspect you can take from one legendary item, put it on another legendary item, or take it from a legendary item, put it on a yellow rare item, make that rare item a legendary. Now, there are limitations of how those things work. First of all, there are 5 categories: defensive, offensive, mobility, utility, and resource. And you can only take powers from an item of the same category, for example, resource, and put it on another item of the same resource category. So as long as it's within the same category, you can move them around from one slot to the other. Otherwise, it won't work. And on top of that, if you're getting unlucky with the RNGs and wood cipher drops, you can actually go and finish dungeons. Certain dungeons, when you finish them, when you kill the final boss of that dungeon, you will unlock the bare minimum possible row of that aspect in a user interface called Codex of Power. So eventually I will expand this list and have all the unknowns filled. I tried finding the information online, I couldn't. Eventually, once the game launches, we would know exactly the location of every single aspect. But for now, some of those we know the information for. And this hopefully gave you an idea of how it works. Now, I've shortlisted the aspects here. As you see, we're taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, because this is the same. We're taking 4 offensive, 3 utility, 1 resource, 1 mobility, and 1 defensive aspects. I've added some notes regarding various things. We'll get to those in a moment. Let's first go through those things one by one, starting with the mobility. Because it's Ghostwalker aspect, I strongly recommend it as shit just hit the fan escape mechanic. You may move freely through enemies while below 40% life. Seems much more useful than critical strike giving you movement speed. Because movement speed is useless if you're surrounded by enemies and you can't escape that situation. Now, mending stone is our defensive aspect. And it's the only one I've put because pens definitely must be defensive. It's the only thing that goes on pens. But I've added others. So if you want to work things around, you can see there's options for each slot. But let's look at this one. Let's look at mending. Mending is here. The duration of Earthen Bulwark is increased by 6 seconds in addition. Killing an enemy with Earthen skills replenishes X of your active Earthen Bulwark's barrier. Strongly recommend that. It's not a must-have, but I think it's strongly recommended, and I wouldn't part with it for this build. Now let's go on to Umbro. Umbro is a great resource generating aspect. Gaining spirit in our case when we crowd control an enemy. And since we have things like aspect of shared misery, when you hit a crowd controlled enemy, there's X% chance for that crowd control effect to spread. And this is great synergy for this build in general. I strongly recommend it. In fact, it should be must have, but not everyone would want it. Some people would say, okay, I've got plenty of crowd control, I don't need this. I personally wouldn't start with this one for this setup, considering how many of the things are dependent on having the enemies be stunned, knocked down, or whatever. So I've put shared misery here. Normally I put it on the amulet because of the 50% efficiency effectiveness, but I put it on the helmet. Then we have quicksand on the chest. Damage from earth skills swows enemies for 5 seconds. And then I put ballistic on the amulet, and ballistic is great. When you have fortified life, your earthen skills gain +3. Let that sink in. +3 to your earth skills. That's why I try to get as many earth skills as possible. So when you have fortified life, and that's why we have so much fortify. And if this +3 gets the 50% effectiveness, that means it's +4.5. So this 4.5 round down or round up remains to be seen. If it rounds up, that means you get +5 to earth skills, which is amazing. Even if it's +4, it's still great. If for whatever reason this effectiveness doesn't work, then swap out ballistic and shared miseries SWAT if this keeps remaining at +3 and doesn't go past +3. Other things to consider here would be crash stone aspect. Crash stone instead of the one-handed or two-handed going there. But if you're using a two-handed setup, which most likely you will be, then you don't need to move Crash Stone because the two-handed gives you 100% rather than 50%. Then in that case, aspect of retaliation from the Gwoffs would be replaced by ballistic, and then you put this one. You put retaliation where Crash Stone was on the one-handed weapon. But if you're doing two-handed, don't worry about this. You can just consider retaliation in the amulet slot. So just keeping Crash Stone here, putting retaliation on the amulet slot and putting ballistic there. But in general, I would keep it the way I've made it, especially if using a two-handed weapon. And especially if this does get more than +3 bonuses. So this brings us to offensive stuff. Offensive stuff, I mentioned Crash Stone and I mentioned retaliation. Let's actually show you what Crash Stone is. Earth skills deal multiplicative more crit strike damage to crowd controlled enemies. A must-have lovely synergy. And if you're using a two-handed weapon, this 42x% becomes 82x% because 100% effectiveness. So I would actually recommend using this with a two-handed weapon if you can. If you can't, if you actually can do one-handed plus offhand, you do get extra retribution, and retribution is extra 30% damage to stunned enemies. Doesn't make up for this percent, but this is multiplicative, this is additive. And since we actually take pummeling here, which is damage to stunned, knockdown, or frozen enemies, those two together, combined with this one, are a lovely synergy. And then we have retaliation, as I showed you. Retaliation is this one here. Your core skills deal up to X multiplicative damage based on your percent fortified life. I don't know how high this gets, but you could sacrifice retaliation if you feel like it. Sacrifice retaliation because it's only for the core skill, which is landslide. So if you want to have Crash Stone and pummeling and retribution, sacrifice retaliation, put this one there on a two-handed sword. That's a good swap, acceptable swap. And this pretty much covers all the things we've taken. Hopefully it's clear. Again, I've put a lot of notes here regarding various things, why you might want to use various things like this and this. Those are a good combo together. If you want to stack up that core skill damage increase faster. In general, build good for the post-story content, level 50, 60 plus content. Once you finish the game, in the non-beta version, in the fully released version of the game. To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for Wooter and not so Wooter games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer want to be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end, Struck Web. Keep it cool until next time and goodbye.